From WLWT, this is Issues.
Hello everyone, I'm Courtis Fuller and welcome. Today a one-on-one interview with former Cincinnati City Council member and one-time candidate for mayor, Yvette Simpson. She is taking on a new job. On January 1st, she will become the Chief Executive Officer of Democracy for America. That's an organization that boasts a membership of 1 million people. Its goal, elect progressive candidates nationwide.
This year has really been an amazing year in showing me what's possible.
A year ago, Yvette Simpson was trying to make history in her quest to become Cincinnati's mayor. She won the primary.
We scared the hell out of them, which is great.
But she came up short in the general election against incumbent John Cranley.
What I've learned is that my voice is important.
Now she's been picked to head up Democracy for America.
The progressive movement has been unapologetic this year, has taken chances on some amazing candidates who, traditional parties, Democratic Party, Republican Party might have overlooked. And we had big gains. This year's class, which I'm extremely proud of, people who I've grown to love and they're like family, are the most diverse, the most female, and the most progressive ever in our history.
Much of her attention will be aimed at 2020.
People are already talking who's going to run, who are we going to support, and really the job of organizations like Democracy for America is, one, to be a part of the conversation. Whoever is planning on running has to answer questions about health care, about education. What are you going to do about criminal justice reform? What are you going to do about immigration? These issues that matter to progressive organizations. And if we endorse a candidate, they're going to be our candidate, and they're going to have to make sure that they're carrying forward those messages and those issues. So earlier this year, I started a consulting practice, working on politics, program, and policy work. And my first contract was with Democracy for America, which is a national grassroots nonprofit organization that's been in place for about 15 years. They brought me on board to run their federal program, which means I got to help them identify candidates who are running for Congress to endorse and to provide the support to get them over the finish line to victory. And so I started that work in May. It was a big and fast season because primary season was in June. And we had an amazing year this year. So I started to do that work and, like I said, had great results, really enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. And just recently they extended an offer to me, as you know, to be the CEO of Democracy for America. We will support someone. Democracy for America has always, and will be a part of the solution, whether it's pushing gently from behind or pulling. But I'm really inspired this year by the fact that across the nation there are people who are running, who are brown and black and saying, I'm brown and black, and these are the issues that matter to me and my community, who are saying I'm an immigrant, who are saying I'm a Muslim, who are saying I'm a Native American, and I deserve to have a seat at the table, and Congress is going to be better for it. And so I think it's probably fitting that Democracy for America decided this year to make a shift in the leadership, because we know that that's just going to continue. Yeah, I think part of it is there are so many people around our country who have been waiting on the world to change, right? They have voted, they have been consistent, they have believed, and their world has not changed 1 inch. And so they're fed up, right? And they're saying, I'm either going to completely disconnect from the system, or I'm going to make sure that I'm supporting people who share my values. And it's creating room for people who are saying, look, system hasn't been working for you. Let me get in there and fix it. And I'm going to do that right now. We've got candidates like Alexandria Ocasio and Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib, who are just warriors, right? We call them the Justice League, right? They are warriors who are saying, look, we can have a better government. We just have to demand what most Americans want. Like, people are making the progressive movement seem like it's a fringe. It's not. Poll the issues. Most Americans want affordable health care for everybody. Everybody should have access to free and affordable health care, right? Everybody should have access to low or no cost tuition for their, for college. Everyone should be treated fairly, and immigrants should be treated like Americans in this country, right? And so, we poll these issues, and progressive values are American values, right? criminal justice values matter to everyone, especially to brown and black people, but to everyone. We know we can't have a country that incarcerates most people who are able to work and should be working and being productive members of our society. So, you know, it's not as fringe as people think. I think the tone now is that we've been waiting long enough and that real change is possible if we elect these people. You see Stacey Abrams' race, you see Andrew Gillum's race, both candidates who DFA has supported and continues to support through their continued races against voter suppression. And so we're saying this is the change our country has always needed. And I think it's inspiring. It really lifts me up. And I think we also are winning in places where that is less popular, right? So you think about Lauren Underwood's race in Illinois. She's one of our candidates. A black woman, young woman, nurse, wins in Naperville, which is a very, very white and very, very wealthy suburb community, the district.
It was her home. That's where she grew
It
up.
was her home, but you have to remember, people like Randy Holgren have been a part of that system for a very, very long time, and people believe that people of color, women, can't win in more conservative districts. Well, we can, right? And so it was really inspiring, and I think what it's shown us for the future is there are so many places that we can go, right? That we're not limited to what part of the country. Clearly we're taking the South. We're not limited to just major cities. Lucy McBath also won in a suburb that's pretty different, wealthy and white in Georgia. So it's inspiring, and I think the work that we need to do is to continue to seek out these amazing people who are everyday people who want to lead our country, who want to lead our cities, who want to lead our states. The name of the organization I now represent as CEO is Democracy for America. So what is democracy if you cast a vote and we don't count it, right? And we know voter suppression starts far before that, right? There's so many efforts to intimidate voters, to make the rules tough for people, system issues that make it harder for people, taking away early vote days. We've had that battle here in Ohio, as you can imagine, and you remember. And so now we're saying someone has legally cast a vote and we're just not gonna count it, or ballots are showing up and we don't know how they got there or why they're not in the hands of election officials. So you'll see this new Congress, this freshman Congress, take up voting rights really, really early in the term. And I'm really excited about that because we know that the states have the power, right, to regulate elections, but they have to be fair. And the fact that there are still some states, you know, you got Florida we're still wrestling with, Georgia still wrestling with, where people have enormous power at the local level, county level, to determine whether somebody's vote counts is crazy, right? So we have to have a fair system, because if people don't believe in democracy, they won't engage in it. And we know what the opposite of democracy is, right? It's something, you know, that can be as extreme as anarchy, can be as, you know, as close as disengagement or disillusionment. And we don't want people not to believe in the system that our country was founded on. So we've got to get back to basics. And we've got to make sure that and demand that at the very least, we allow people to engage in what the most American practice there was, which is voting. And not only that, but to make it easier and to encourage people to vote, right? It's just a basic thing. But this is what happens when one of my friends who's a little more skeptical than me in the movement, this is what happens when people feel like they're losing power. They get afraid and they do all kinds of things, including break the rules to be able to hold on to that power. And we're just not gonna let them do it. So we'll be fighting that. So DFA has a presence in Burlington, Vermont. It's where our administrative staff lives and where our office is. But most of our organization is remote, and a lot of political organizations and progressive organizations are based that way because we need to be in places where our candidates are and where our members are. So I will continue to work from Cincinnati, so y'all not getting rid of me. I'm a Cincinnati girl. But my team will be spread out across the country, right? So our chairman will be in California. Our strategic advisor is in Connecticut. We've got team members that are in Texas. We've got team members that are in Michigan. And we'll continue to operate that way. So I get the fun challenge of managing a remote team. But I believe, in the people who work with us. And we're going to work really, really hard. One of the other big things that so I will be in Cincinnati, footnote, but I will be traveling a lot because I've got to get to our donors and I've got to get to our candidates and our electeds, because we're, of course, impacting policy, and to our team. And so it's going to be fun. But I think it is inspiring, right? Particularly with where Ohio is right now, that two of the largest organizations in the progressive movement, Democracy for America and Our Revolution, are both led by Black women from Ohio. So, Nina Turner, the Nina Turner. And of course, we work very closely with Our Revolution and the other organizations in the movement. And so, I think that the thing is, Ohio is a progressive state. And so people are already calling me, what are you going to do about Ohio? Well, Ohio is a state in the nation, and we will be working on Ohio. It's an important state for presidential elections. It's an important state to me personally. But I do think it's inspiring and interesting that that the movement, the National Progressive Movement, is in Ohio. In places like Texas, as of the early vote, we saw numbers as high as 500, 600% increase in millennial voting in midterm elections. And so, that's how we know we're winning, when we're getting young people engaged. And frankly, I don't blame them, right? They're watching what's happening around them, and they don't like it either. And they're saying, we can do better. How do we engage in this process? The number of young people who are running for office. I mean, we've got two of the youngest women ever to be in Congress were elected. How do we engage those young people, those brown people, those women to be not only voting, but engaged in campaigns, volunteering, staffing up campaigns, running, being advocates, being activists in their community. And we're really inspired by the young people that we're seeing. I met a young lady. I was down in New Orleans for a conference called Netroots Nation, and it's like the Super Bowl for progressive movement. And I ran into this very inspiring young lady from Minnesota. She had to be 23 years old, running for state office. Man, she wowed me, young Black girl. And I said, you know what? I wish I had it together like that when I was 23. And she won that race. Well, I believe that all politics are local. That's where I started. But I also believe that 2020 being the year that I think we see, either we're going to make a major shift away from, what we've seen, this negativity, this racism, this anger, this hate, or we're going to be in this for a little while longer. And, we want this to be a big year, right? We know that a lot of people vote in presidential elections. We had a big midterm year. We expect even bigger. We're going to use that as an opportunity to take some chances, to again, get some people who wouldn't traditionally run, to train them up, to get them elected up and down the ballot. Because one, we know that our cities matter. We know that our states matter. We know that our federal government matters. But this is a really important time in history where you're seeing more women running, more brown people running, and we want to see that in everything from City Hall all the way up to the White House. And so we're going to take advantage of the fact that, one, we're going to have more people activating on the ground, registering voters. We're going to have more people actually voting, more people paying attention and volunteering in campaigns. And we're going to use that up and down the ticket across our country to get more inspiring, amazing people elected to office. Now, you know that in the presidential election, it does, it fills up the room. But we've also got federal races that are coming up. We'll be watching Susan Collins' race, as you know. And we're hopefully soon there will be a challenger in that race, and we'll be on that really, really quickly. We've got some federal races that we'll have to protect. As you know, they'll be coming for the individuals who were recently elected. We got to save those seats. So it's going to be a big year, I think, up and down and across the country. I was on the ground in Texas, and there was a lot of excitement in Texas around Beto's race and Gina Ortiz-Jones' race. And we were engaging some folks in San Antonio. And there were folks who were trying to not be, we were at a voting event. People who were there knew, and there were still people who were saying, yeah, no, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to talk about voting. I'm not voting. And I'm like, help me understand why you are not voting. Like, I think people are still disillusioned. I think people still don't believe. And guess what? It's our job to make them believe. So the idea that politics has become this thing that's in a vacuum, politicians are talking over people's heads. They see a lot of fighting. They see a lot of grandstanding, but nobody's saying, how do I change your life? And that's what the progressive movement is trying to usher in, right? Leaders who will care first about you and second about everything else. And so, yeah, they need to hold elected leaders to account, because you're right, the world hasn't changed much for these people. But I also think that we've got to do a better job of educating people, one, about the fact that you not voting certainly doesn't change things, right? And that you give people power to have decisions over your life that you don't want them to have that kind of power over. And we've also got to make sure that we deal with these voter suppression issues, because I heard a lot of people say in places like Florida and Georgia, see, I told you it didn't matter whether I voted. I voted and my vote still isn't being counted. These voter suppression efforts not only directly affect elections, but they give people the belief that even if I drag my butt in the rain and sign up and go vote, they still find a way to win. And so our job is to not let them win. And that's why these races, this is why we've put over $100,000 in the effort down in Georgia against voter suppression, and almost that same amount in Florida. And we're doing the same thing in places like Texas and Mississippi, because we know that if we don't win this battle, all the naysayers and the people who have not wanted to vote will be confirmed right. And the folks who have been trying to keep people from voting will win. And so our first battle is, one, make sure everybody votes. Two, if people vote, make sure it counts. And so we've got to be in this battle. And, you know, I'm inspired that we are. And we've got to prove the individuals who are saying my life hasn't changed, we got to prove them wrong. And honestly, right now, we have not been doing a very good job, but I'm inspired. I'm inspired by what we're seeing in this new Congress and what we're seeing down ticket. We supported Wesley Bell's race in St. Louis. You know, he came out of the Ferguson movement, took down a long time stronghold in St. Louis. When we have wins like that, it just inspires people. So we got to take on more of those races and get those kind of wins. And I think it'll help people maybe believe they can make a difference. Every single state does this differently. There are places that have online registration already. There are places that still don't allow it. There are places that have early vote. There are places that don't. And so the voting rights conversation that's going to happen is, okay, when we talk about granting the right for states to regulate elections, how do we make sure from a federal level we do it in a way that all the states are being fair? You know, I'm an advocate of making sure we try to standardize these processes, because it shouldn't be a different process really in New York than it is in Ohio. At the very least, we should be making it easier. And so there are conversations about how we, you know, can we do online voting, getting states across the country on online registration. And we've got to make sure we open this up. And it is completely possible, right, to make voting much easier. We see it, you know, around the world in other countries. There are many things that we can do right now that are much more challenging, and processes that require more security that we can do online than what we do right now. And I think what's happened is, because this is reserved to the states, and then there are counties that administer it, this has become like this little fiefdom that folks are like, oh, I've always done it this way. This is the way we do it in Broward County. This is the way we do it in Hamilton County, so that people are not releasing that control. And I think Congress is going to have to come in and say, here are the minimum standards that you have to have, states, in order to show that you have an open and fair process for your elections. And then you have to work within the confines of that. Because there, as you remember back in the, you know, in the movement days, back in the 60s, they had all kinds of tactics in certain states to keep people from voting. Well, what we're seeing today is, I think, a more modernized version of some of those same barriers, and we want to eliminate those as much as we can. So we're going to be active in that. And if you watch this first Congress, you probably already saw they've got their top list of things that they're going to be proposing early in the term, and voting rights is at the top of that. And best believe that DFA, Move On, the progressive movement is going to be actively advocating for an aggressive voter rights piece of legislation coming out of early in the term. I think the interesting thing about counting votes is, every jurisdiction has discretion over how they view this conversation. Different states have discretion. And I think when you have situations like what we're seeing across our country this year, Congress has to tamper down that discretion, right? Cincinnati, we had a battle around provisional ballots and when they count, whether if you're in the right place but you're at the wrong table, whether it counts. You don't want to have that battle county by county when we're talking about one of the most important, probably presidential elections in our lifetime. We want to make sure that before we get to 2020, we've ironed out and wrinkled out all attempts and opportunities for these individual counties and these states to say, guess what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to make it as hard as possible. I'm going to make it as difficult as possible for people to vote. I'm going to make it as difficult as possible for people's votes to be counted. And guess what? I'm going to control this election. I was talking to a woman yesterday, and she was saying in New York, one of her good friends went to vote at one polling location, was someone who had an ethnic look to them. They are from that heritage, but were born in America, went to vote, name is in there, you don't have an ID requirement in this state, went to vote, name was in there, signed the book, and a precinct judge comes over and says, you gotta go home and get your passport. That's the kind of discretion that can cause people to not want to vote. And that will affect elections every time. And when you've got elections like we're seeing in Texas, like Texas 23, that could be decided by 1,000 votes, 500 votes, when you've got what's happening in Georgia and Florida across the state, gonna be decided by less than 1%, every vote counts. And so we've got to make sure that we tamper down that type of discretion, right? And not allow individual counties and precincts and tables to be able to make their own rules, but we've got to make sure we're regulating that as much as we can. And my hope is that people wake up and see, as I said, that progressive issues are American issues. Progressive values are American. You poll Americans and you ask them, do you think everybody should have access to health care? Overwhelmingly, Americans say yes, Republicans and Democrats. We've got to get past all of the Washington rhetoric, and we've got to say, how can we really change people's lives and stop having this internal conversation in Washington that people down here don't even know about and really don't care about.
Always good to talk to Yvette Simpson. She will make history by becoming the first woman of color to hold an executive leadership role for DFA, and we wish her all the best of luck. Well, that does it for the program today. I'm Courtis Fuller. Have a nice day.